Before we get started with today's episode, I want to take a second to talk to y'all about Anchor. If you're anything like me, you've kind of recently fallen into the world of podcasting, both on the listening and creating side. I recently found a bunch of podcasts that I love and decided it was about time that I make one of my own because I love talking to people and I love sharing creative ideas, and this was just the perfect way to do that, but I had no idea how to do it because, of course, I've never done it before. But some of the podcasts I listened to mentioned Anchor, and I decided to check it out, and it is the best decision I have ever made. Anchor is a free podcasting service that allows you to record, distribute, and pick the cover art and music for your own podcast. I mean, what else can you ask for? It makes the whole process so simple, especially for those of us who are just starting out and really have no idea what we're doing. And in order to distribute your podcast, it takes little to no work from you at all. Anchor will distribute your podcast to places like Spotify, Apple Music, Google Podcasts, the whole 9 yards. And you can just watch yourself grow and change. And it's a great way to develop that learning experience. So if anyone is interested in making a podcast anytime soon or ever, really, go to anchor.fm to check it out. Now on with the episode. What is up, guys, gals, and non-binary pals? Happy Wednesday and welcome back to the Fangirl Files podcast. I'm Sabrina, and Madison is actually not in today because she is out defending her thesis this week. We are both officially back at school for the spring semester here at ASU. We are both technically seniors, so it's a busy time, but I wanted to hop on this week to chat with y'all because it just didn't seem fair to leave you guys hanging without an episode. So I'm actually not going to be alone today. My boyfriend Reed is coming on, and we are going to discuss C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien. If you don't know who those people are, they wrote the Narnia and the Lord of the Rings series, respectively, and we are both massive fans. So we're going to be having a little debate because, funnily enough, these two authors tie in very closely with each other. So, without further ado, I am going to welcome Reed. Hi, Reed. How are you?
I'm doing fine. How are you, Sabrina?
We both think this is very weird because we never call each other by our names, so bear with us because it's a little odd.
Usually we just make grunting noises.
Or be like, hey, you.
Yeah, hey, you. Or things along those lines.
Just pterodactyl noises.
Exactly. We're dinosaurs. Jurassic Park ain't got nothing on us.
Don't even worry about it. Anyways.
So, C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien.
Yes, we're both really excited for this topic because I think we both go way back with both of the authors.
Yeah.
Because you've been a fan of Tolkien's writing in Lord of the Rings for how long?
Oh, for ages. I remember I'd sit underneath this tree by the playground and read Lord of the Rings in like 5th grade, and it is good stuff.
Yeah.
And you've been with C.S. Lewis for a while, too.
So much of my life, I think. I can't remember what age it was, but you know how we had those scholastic book fairs?
The scholastic book fairs.
Yes.
Where, like, you go and you just...
Or, like, you'd get the catalog and they'd order you books. My mom did that, and the boxed set for the Narnia series was pretty cheap. And at the time, I was just a little kid. I'd only seen the movies. And I didn't know there were 7 books. So, of course, I was very confused upon my reading them as to why the Pevensies weren't in all 7. But looking back on it, I think The Magician's Nephew was, like, an awesome book. And then I remember Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. The 3rd book, I know the title of, and I don't like it. I know Prince Caspian, Dawn Treader, Silver Chair, and then The Final Battle, obviously. All amazing books, and they all just wove together really beautifully, and I think I've read it 2 or 3 times maybe. I was probably 9 and then probably 11 or 12 when I read it again. So it's been a long time.
Book Fair.
This episode has been sponsored by Scholastic.
I'm wish.
I really wish. If I could get, like, money for promoting publishing companies, or not even money, I would sponsor these people for free.
Oh, yeah.
They could just send me advanced readers' copies of books, and I would be happy.
You would cry.
It would be like, have you seen those book boxes that, like, you get sent a book of the month every month? That's what I want.
Oh, yeah.
I need that. Anyways.
Be a book influencer.
I would love to. Please, guys, we now have a YouTube channel for the Fangirl Files, and it is obviously the same name as our podcast. Very same cover art. We will be posting our episodes, recordings of us, like, recording, and then we're probably also gonna post original content, which much of it is going to be me doing booktube. I have decided this, and I'm so excited. So yes,
Woohoo.
Book influencer
She's so
for
excited
me.
she did her little excited dance.
Yeah, you guys will probably see it in one of the videos one of these times, but it's okay. Not now.
Yes.
Anyways, Tolkien and Lewis.
Tolkien and Lewis.
So, Clive Staples Lewis?
Clive Staples Lewis.
I didn't know because I never thought to look.
He popped out of the womb CS. Other letters don't matter, just CS.
Oh my god. Oh no, but anyways, Clive Staples Lewis and John Ronald Reuel Tolkien.
Quite chunky names, let's just say.
Very chunky.
Better known as C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien, or like as best buddies could get.
And teacher friends and literary friends and just brainstorming partners. They had a whole bromance going on.
Seriously. I mean, they had a informal book club called the Inklings where they basically just got together, they read bad prose and just tried to see who could go without laughing the longest.
Oh my god.
They just straight up roasted people. But also...
And each other.
And each other, of course, because best friends are the meanest to each other. Of course, that's not promoting toxic relationships. That's what I'm saying.
No, but if you fall down, you expect your best friend to laugh.
That's perfect. That's the perfect way to put it.
That's what we're saying here.
Yeah, exactly.
And C.S. Lewis nominated Tolkien for a Nobel Prize, which I think is the most adorable thing ever.
He did it in secret because he didn't want him to be like, oh, you just nominated me because of my friend. And nobody knew until 50 years later.
That's so cute.
I know. They were such good friends.
Goals.
I love that.
Goals.
Yes. And also they talked a lot about literature as well. They agreed that C.S. Lewis would do quote unquote space travel to his universe or portals and stuff, whereas Tolkien would do quote unquote time travel and do a different time period.
That works surprisingly well for both of their books.
It really does.
Not that Tolkien is doing a lot of time travel in Lord of the Rings.
I think it meant more in the sense of not, this is about time travel, but my universe is in a different time, your universe is in a different space.
And also, his universe is very much so reliant on the concept of time, whereas C.S. Lewis's one time is not linear.
Exactly. I think that's what makes it work so well. Especially since Tolkien was one of the other reasons I like Tolkien is he's big into linguistics and Old Norse and has some understanding of, I think it was Finnish, I'm not entirely sure to be perfectly honest, but good old J.R.R. Tolkien, shoot, I forgot the direction I was going. Tolkien was big into that history languagey stuff. So some of the languages in his those of you who've seen the movies, the people on horseback, the riders of Rohan, they speak, was it Old or Middle English? I forget, but he uses it as...
I feel like it would have been Middle English.
It was Middle English because the dwarves spoke in The Hobbit Old English, which he later translated into his own constructed language, which is one of the things that's coolest about Tolkien. He literally built entire languages from scratch. Anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm sorry.
No, you're good. I mean, I think that, one of the best things about them both is their world building skills. Mm-hmm. If we may jump around a little bit.
Yeah, do you want to jump straight to the world building?
I mean, we can go back to everything else,
Yeah.
but I would love to go into world building. I think they both have a consistent talent for that, and I think that's very much so a product of their friendship with each other, because I'm
Yeah.
sure they bounced ideas off of one another. Their creativity must have rubbed off on one another or, like, influenced them in some way, because
For sure.
if you look at Tolkien's world, it's very, very intricate. He's developed a whole language. He's developed several different species. And
Yeah. I mean, well, Narnia as well. I see you could go
Oh,
off on that.
I could go off. There's maybe thousands of different species in the Narnian land universe. There's so many, and the fact that animals are personified as well.
Yeah.
That's another thing, but
Not to mention, it goes over a whole period of time with all sorts of different characters and stuff.
right, it goes. The best thing to me, and I'm gonna jump a little around.
Yeah, that's totally fine.
The best thing about it to me is that C.S. Lewis, I guess Tolkien does this in a way when he's describing, like, Frodo's relationship to the ring in the beginning, and I'm thinking of the movies because I haven't read the books.
I gotcha.
But you know how at the beginning he's
Laying
out why the rings are important, and, like, I guess that's what Tolkien does in his way of, like, setting the scene.
I gotcha.
But the way that, and I assume that happens in the books.
What's it like for C.S. Lewis? Because I'm not as familiar with Narnia.
C.S. Lewis, it starts with a creation myth, almost. It starts with this little child who lives with his uncle, and he discovers Narnia with a friend of his, and basically they're watching the creation of the world.
Oh.
And the way that it's, and what I mean is, have you seen the line, The Witch in the Wardrobe?
Yes.
Like the movie, because they touch upon it lightly. I don't know if you would remember this exact part, but do you remember when they're at, like, the war camp? Because you haven't read the Narnia books, right?
I did a while ago. Like, I read it when I was...
Okay, well, I'm going to reference the movie for also some of you who haven't
Was that
read
the part
books.
with the centaurs?
Yes.
Yeah,
So when they're at the war camp, and then the witch shows up, the white witch.
Yes.
And she declares war, and Aslan's like, no. And then all of a sudden, she goes, you remember the laws upon which Narnia was built.
Oh.
You were there, and so was I.
Mm-hmm.
What the magician's nephew does is it basically writes those bylaws out.
Oh, okay.
And has them, like, in a ceremony creating, like, their bylaws as a country, I suppose.
Okay.
Because they do refer to it as a country, although it is not
I getcha.
worldly.
No, that makes a lot of sense. That's cool. I think people usually think of Narnia as just Lion, Witch, and Wardrobe.
Because that's what Hollywood has made it
Exactly.
out to be.
They took the second book and, like, hey, let's make this everything. But I mean, I think there's that whole important backstory stuff that you're a lot better versed in than I am.
Right.
That's really
Because
establishes a lot.
even in the movie The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, they didn't make it everything. They lightly said, like, oh, do you remember the bylaws, right? They never said what those bylaws are. They never really specified how long
Does the book do
Narnia...
that?
Yes, because
Oh, wow.
that's the way it is. The way the series chronicles out is the first one is about the magician's nephew, which the magician is the uncle of the main character. And that uncle has basically, like, possessed this ring that ended up creating this other world. And then, so that's where Narnia is created and how they're creating the bylaws and such. And then the second book is The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, where the Pevensies come in and they discover Narnia and they end up ruling. The third book is kind of like showing what happens during their rule.
I getcha.
And I don't necessarily love it all that much because it didn't focus on them. It was just like a period of time during which they were ruling. And then the fourth one is Prince Caspian, where obviously Narnia has been overrun by Caspian's people, and then they have to join together to take it back. And then there's the Dawn Treader, where Peter and Susan are done with Narnia. They've outgrown it. They're too old, so Edmund and Lucy go back, and it's only been 3 years And they travel across the sea with Prince Caspian to kind of save their current civilization. And then they have their cousin with them, Eustace, who in the silver chair goes back alone with one of his friends. And Caspian, by this point, is an old man, so they have to kind of protect the land themselves because he is unable to. And then I don't remember really what happens in the final battle. I just remember being very confused because I wasn't sure how everyone that had ever been mentioned had ended up in Narnia. Because they said Peter and Susan were too old and somehow they were there. And
we're doing spring cleaning and found the wardrobe again.
You know, no, that's not what happened.
I was just kidding.
But I think they had all died. If somebody knows, please tell me. Because I was so little, I would have to reread it. I have not had the time. That was a big tangent. But
a lot of reading to do, yes.
But, like, all of C.S. Lewis's books go off of one another.
Yeah.
In terms of world building. And it just progresses and progresses and progresses until it reaches that boiling point.
Yeah. That makes a lot... I haven't really thought about all that world building.
Yeah.
Because there's certainly a lot. And I mean, I think the fact that Tolkien and C.S. Lewis had these, like, was basically an informal world building club, it really goes to show how in-depth and collaborative the process was. I think Tolkien, too, has a very elaborate world. Like, in this, he doesn't go into the creation myth in Lord of the Rings.
Right.
Lord of the Rings starts with, like in the movie, Bilbo's 111th birthday, big old snappy party and stuff.
Yeah.
And it's basically written as a sequel to The Hobbit, so
right.
That's probably why it didn't quite make as much sense. But a lot of his world building happens within, like, the Silmarillion, where he does go into a creation myth, where Iluvatar sings the world into creation, and it's a really beautiful story. But he doesn't put that in Lord of the Rings. And then the character of Arwen in the movies, in the book, she's hardly a footnote. She's really not there. It's basically just the men, so you have to really dig through the footnotes and the other texts to get all that. But then at the same time, he'll also throw in big globs of lore where you don't want it. Like, oh, see this tree? There's a fox right here. Or, oh, I remember vividly it went into a ton of depth about the elven rope around Gollum's neck, and I remember reading that and thinking, why are you telling me about how this rope burns his skin so much? Like, that's a little much.
Probably because you were also younger when you were reading that too, and now you're like, you know what? And I appreciate it. Yeah,
there's a lot more details that I appreciate in more depth now with, like, the Silmarillion and stuff, but it's... And I'm by no means attacking Tolkien's world building. I love this stuff. I mean, I've got, like, the Tolkien stuff on my wall right now.
Yeah, you are a big Tolkien fan.
It's good stuff. Not as big as Stephen Colbert. He's, like, huge. I don't know why I brought that up. I am getting off track.
We're getting very off track. This episode is going to be a mess. It's kind of late as we're recording this. We've had a long day. So this is going to be all over the place. Bear with us.
Fix and post.
Yes, fix it and post. That's the phrase. We love production.
It's like Star Wars.
But, no, I get you because that's how I feel about, or that's how I used to feel about The Magician's Nephew.
Yeah.
Because at the time, again, I was young and I liked the movies. Mm-hmm. And so I liked the characters from the movies and I wanted to see more of them. Whereas The Magician's Nephew does not have them.
Yeah, I get
per se. And now, like, looking back on it, I really want to reread The Magician's Nephew as a 20-some-year-old and look more into the creation myths.
A lot of
that. But it's like, he does very good with creation myths and tying it into religion as well.
And I think that's largely because they're sort of different academic backgrounds, where C.S. Lewis was sort of I believe,
didn't he go to Catholic school, I feel like.
Well, no, C.S. Lewis was atheist, actually, for a while, but he converted to Christianity because Tolkien was a devout Roman Catholic. He converted to Protestantism. And
my god, he converted for him!
And then Tolkien got angry because he converted to Protestantism instead of Catholicism.
Romantic.
I think it's kind of funny, too, that...
A love triangle.
That Tolkien was very, very religious, but it's C.S. Lewis that's full of religious allegories.
It's all because Aslan is obviously an allegory for God.
Yeah, a very obvious Jesus allegory.
Because they say he disappears traveling between worlds for years on end. And it's a very, very special occurrence when he touches their land. And that's why it's so significant when the Pevensies come around, because he then is like, I have to speak to these children.
Yeah. Not to mention the resurrection of Aslan. That's...
Oh my god,
that's
that's
direct
oh my goodness.
Jesus. I think part of that is that...
The fact that
I'm
having so many light bulbs! Oh my goodness! Hang on. So obviously there's the scene where the witch is set to execute him. And... Wait. So basically, how it leads to Aslan's execution is Lucy discovers Narnia. She tells Edmund. Edmund doesn't believe her. The rest of the family doesn't believe her. Then Edmund goes, and he meets the White Witch.
He's Judas?
He is Judas. I was getting there.
Sorry.
Yeah. So he's the one that rats them out, and he says to the White Witch, we're doing this to meet Aslan. And so she's like, oh, fuck. And then she binds Aslan and plunges a dagger through his heart. Essentially, he's not crucified, he's laid against a stone, but he's
sacrificially and painfully murdered.
Right.
And returns from the dead.
Yeah. And it's the way that he was magically healed by love, and he sacrificed himself for the love of the country and the love of those children.
Yeah.
So that they wouldn't be harmed.
And C.S. Lewis intended that allegory as well. In fact, that was one of Tolkien's criticisms of C.S. Lewis, because they were friends, but they didn't always agree on writing or English teaching and stuff like that. Tolkien, despite being very religious, was huge into fairy tales and myths. Partially, that's one of the things I come to appreciate about Tolkien's writing. A lot of stuff seems silly, like his poetry is not good. But then I've read some of his translations of Middle English texts and looked at the Middle English myself, and a lot of it is specifically only good if you have that specific academic expertise, and you're like, okay. And Tolkien was very much into fairy tales and what they say about the human condition, whereas C.S. Lewis was very much into
what God says
exactly
about the human condition, to be honest.
Which I think sort of draws the differences between their world-building styles. And
it's also that and I think it goes into that saying each of the Pevensey children has a flaw.
And
and it's a fatal flaw.
Yeah. And that's something, I guess, very allegorical.
Yeah.
Whereas Tolkien will throw in Tom Bombadil, a fat singing fairy-like man with wearing bright colors, who's just like, oh yeah, he threw him in because his kids liked the character, and because it's similar to XYZ fairy tales, makes it seem more like a fairy tale. That doesn't... Right. Tom Bombadil doesn't have a character flaw other than that he's silly. It doesn't feed into larger religious allegories, but it feeds into what he's trying to do, build a fairy tale.
Yeah, and speaking of fairy tales, I kind of want to say, would you classify Lord of the Rings as a children's book, a young adult book, or somewhere in between that and the book for a scholar and somebody who's more interested in the mythological and lore side of things?
Well, I know Hobbit was a kid's book. It was written as a kid's book. And you as a kid didn't like it. So clearly not.
I couldn't stand it.
I liked it, but I see why you don't like it.
I decided to read that first, though. I wanted to read the prequel, and then I wanted to read Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, and you...
And I mean,
you were watching Lord of the Rings with me, and you didn't know what a hobbit was because you didn't read The Hobbit. And that's okay. It's just...
I understood that Frodo was a hobbit. I just didn't know what that entailed.
That's fair. No,
Please
I get
don't
that.
judge me.
Yeah, she knew what a hobbit was. She didn't know all the little things, like they eat a lot of food and have second breakfasts, things like that.
Second breakfast.
Yeah, I love. You are basically like a
I am
hobbit.
a hobbit, except with tiny feet.
You are a hobbit with tiny feet instead of big hairy feet.
Yes, but I think it's a good, like, I know that you said Hobbit was classified as a kid's book.
I think Lord of the Rings was written more as an adult's book, especially. Yeah, I think.
I think the language in it, as well as like the lore and the concepts, are probably.
He has an 80-page section for the Council of Elrond, where it's literally just a giant meeting. I don't think kids would enjoy that.
I think what he probably intended was that children read The Hobbit, and then they know that Lord of the Rings exists. So when they grow, they probably are like, I want to read about.
I gotcha.
That, you know what I mean?
Whereas YA novels aim instead to target both audience instead of feeding into it.
Yes, and it's
right?
like...
Is that accurate? You're the YA expert.
What YA does is it looks at, like... You know how in most novels that are fictional, the character has a full character arc and they've grown into the person that they want to be by the end. And they're perfect by the end. YA does not do that. YA has small, little realizations within it. And, like, you know that by the end, there is still room for growth.
Okay.
And I think in Lord of the Rings, Frodo is very much so influenced by Gandalf. And by everyone that's accompanying him on his journey, and not so much looking within himself. And that's why he's so vulnerable to the ring.
Okay.
Whereas, like, in any other YA novel, it would cause the character to look inside themselves for that growth.
Okay.
Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great observation. I didn't think about it that way.
And then I think C.S. Lewis obviously wrote Narnia as a children's book. Through and through, all the way until the end. It was all for children.
Yeah.
Because granted, it was before the time when YA was revolutionized to have those smaller character arcs, so these children in Narnia are tackling very real-world problems like adults. Like, for example, I'm going to reference The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe again, because that's the one with the most consistent, like, childlike plot. The Pevensies are sent off to live with the professor at his mansion, and Peter's very much so like, no, I can be the adult, I can take care of this family, and he doesn't allow himself to even go into the vulnerable space of, I'm going to miss my mother, or I'm going to miss my family, because he's probably only 15 or 16 at the time of this, like, so he's taken on a full father role. So the children in Narnia really don't go through a lot of self-discovery, except for maybe Edmund, who goes from being Judas to being pretty decent.
Yeah.
But I think he wrote it as a children's novel because a lot of it was written for those adventures that like the adult-like adventures that children wanted to embark on, like war, like discovering a new land, like building an empire, to be honest.
Appealing to their sense of fantasy.
Right. And it's like, those were very adult concepts at the time because World War II had just ended. It was the 1950s. Granted, C.S. Lewis was in Europe, but it was still very much so with Nazi Germany and everything. Like, it's touched upon in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe that London is being bombed by planes. It is the middle of World War II. He's very aware of that being a trope. And so he wants kids to feel like, oh, I can do some good.
Yeah.
And so I think that was a lot more so aimed for children because it wasn't complicated to understand even for a 9 or 10-year-old. But I think Tolkien is a little different.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that's a really insightful perspective.
Yeah, I just think it was better for children overall, and it never got less childlike even as they grew.
It had a sort of mysticism. I like that about it.
Yeah, it was And then if the characters changed, they were completely different people by the end. Not like the little arcs with room for error.
Yeah.
Like Edmund. I just said, like, he stops being Judas and he's this fully changed man. And it's consistent like that. He's suddenly this man with honor and everybody forgets, oh, he ratted them out.
Yeah.
And it's this whole big change. Or even later on with Eustace and the Dawn Treader has this full 180 from this, like, arrogant little shit to this person that's like, I want to save Narnia and my cousins and my family. And he goes back with the intent to protect Narnia.
Yeah.
So it's like he has a full character arc, not one that a child would have.
So would you say that Narnia is a better marker of the transition to more literature targeted for children?
Yes.
Okay.
I would say so. I don't think Lord of the Rings is suited for, like, younger children.
Yeah.
It may be good for 15, 16, but I think younger children who can't really wrap their head around the lore of Lord of the Rings, and maybe that's why I didn't like it. I was probably 12 when I tried to read The Hobbit.
Mm-hmm.
And I just wasn't a fan because I don't know, first 10 pages or whatever, I was like, I don't understand what's happening.
Tolkien isn't the most compelling children's author. I quite enjoyed it, but I don't think it's for everyone.
Yeah.
He did write a fun children's book called Roverandom about a little toy dog that gets lost and finds its way home. He wrote it for his son. It's super cute.
That's so sweet.
But he should stick to the Roverandoms for children's, because Hobbit is... I feel like Hobbit's more of an early YA type book, I guess. Except, like, Bilbo's, like, 50-something, so...
It's reminiscent of maybe, like, the era of where Treasure Island came from.
Yeah.
Where it's, like, you're not as compelled to see it as a children's novel.
I think that's a really great way of putting it.
Do you know what I mean? Like, I've read Treasure Island. It's a great book, and I can see how for the time it was a children's novel.
Yeah.
But reading it now, I'm like, I don't identify with this child.
Yeah. That makes sense.
Because I think even for fantasy, even with the Hobbits, you have to identify with the character on some level in order for it to be compelling, especially as a child.
And I think what made The Hobbit more of a children's novel for its time is that a lot of other fantasy stories would sort of almost be like big godlike Hercules person just does everything, like Beowulf, just like, oh yes, I am Beowulf, I kill things and am basically a god. Whereas you're following in The Hobbit, you're following what's essentially a short, food-loving guy who likes his tea.
Yeah.
Like a kid can resonate with the bumbling British dude who is missing his tea time to go slay a dragon. But for sure, I think C.S. Lewis, like you said, the characters are more introspective in a way that children can appreciate.
No, I said the opposite.
Oh, right, my bad.
Yeah, they are slightly more introspective, dependent on their age.
Yeah.
Lucy Pevensey, the youngest, is a lot more introspective in The Magician's Nephew. Polly and Diggory are a lot more introspective because they're very much so observing the world around them, and they're like, wow, this is cool, like, but we should go home and, you know, go back to your uncle and tell him what's happened. And they're much more childlike than I would say Tolkien's characters are.
That's fair. And I think it's not hard to argue that Tolkien's characters are a bit relatable. Because, I mean, aside from, like, the big ones in Lord of the Rings, a lot of the other characters are kind of flat and really get developed, like, in the movie. I mean, of course, like, Frodo's quite well developed.
Right. I think for a child, you can relate to the kind of stubbornness that C.S. Lewis's characters have with them. Like, Peter is very much so, I'm the big man, I can do things myself. Susan is very vain and tends to go with what other people are telling her, which it's very easy to absorb the word of your elders as a teenage girl. Especially if it's your mother that you look up to, especially in that time period when all you're wanting is to marry a rich man, get married, and be a housewife. That was what she wanted to do. So she was very vain, very focused on that goal, and very focused on being the caretaker. And I think for the time, a lot of people could relate to that. Edmund is still like the kid that wants to be a grown-up.
Mm-hmm.
And wants to be taken seriously and wants to be too cool for everybody, which I think is relatable even today.
Mm-hmm.
And then Lucy is very much so childlike, full of joy, the person that everybody wants to be.
Yeah.
Whereas if you want to characterize Frodo and Sam and everybody else, really quick for like comparison.
Yeah, sure. Frodo's largely... I think Frodo, the Hobbits are more easy for a child to relate to, especially since he originally wrote it as a children's book and then expanded it. Like, Frodo's just sort of a happy-go-lucky dude, son of Bilbo, sort of adventurous, curious.
Isn't he nephew of Bilbo?
Nephew. Why did I mess that up? I should know this.
You've read this book so many times.
Yes, his parents died, and Bilbo adopted him. I am ashamed. Anyways.
I'm ashamed of you.
You should be ashamed of me. Oof. Break up with me right now because I deserve it.
On the spot. It's over. We're done.
Yes, he's his nephew, but a lot of his development through the series is his corruption with the ring and almost like it's almost like addiction.
That's more of an adult principle to me, where you would relate to like the thirst for power. Because even if it's not addiction, all adults crave success and power and wealth beyond their wildest dreams, and that's what the ring offers Frodo.
Yeah.
And adults, like, I think that's more of a metaphor for how material things can consume you.
Yeah. Especially when you throw Gollum in the mix.
Oh my god.
Oh, Gollum is a spicy boy. We love Gollum in this household.
Despite not having read the books, I think Gollum is the most intricate character I have ever encountered, and that is saying something.
He's quite a complex boy, one could say, to put it technically.
Yes.
Yes. I think a kid could relate to, like, Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli, because they're big, tough dudes coming to save the day. They're like, cool, want to be that guy. But then, like, Gollum, as intricate as it is, that's the type of character that I think resonates more with adults.
Right. Like Gollum, and then I think even Frodo does, and then Sam is kind of somewhere in the middle where he's like the moral compass.
Okay, but I love Sam.
I love Sam
Sam
too.
is an icon.
No, I'm saying that's a good thing. I think that in ways some people can probably relate to Sam because he is the moral compass.
Yes.
Or like, he may not even be embodying of a trait, but he may just be like a reminder for people, like, that someone or something will always steer you back in the right direction.
He's loyal. He's a golden retriever boy. And for the love of God, Frodo, kiss him already.
Oh my god, yeah. We were having a cow. We were like, you know what? We don't think Tolkien intended for Sam and Frodo to be gay, but we think they are. Let us know your thoughts. I will put up a poll on the Instagram.
I don't think it was intended.
There's
There's no way it was intended.
When was The Lord of the Rings published? Because...
like 40-something? I think 49. It took him a while to write it.
So back in the late 40s, I don't think Tolkien would have intended that just because it wasn't the norm back then. Like, you find so many undertones of things from older literature where you're like, you know what, this probably could exist, and I don't know enough about Tolkien to know whether he intended it or not.
I don't think he did.
But just his disposition, if like I read up on him, I'm like, there's no way he intended that. But we think it would have been great.
I think in some ways, I think he was more like cool and socially awesome than people give him credit for, and in some ways he wasn't. Like, the Nazi party asked him to publish the Hobbit and make some edits and stuff, and he wrote a scathing letter that he then made public about, like, just roasting them for how inaccurate their quote-unquote Aryan race bullshit was, with, like, historical and linguistic shit. He was openly opposed to them. He was a huge environmentalist who stopped driving and rode his bike everywhere. But at the same time, some of his characterizations in the books lead you to question how he sees other races.
Right, because he was Roman Catholic.
He was Roman Catholic.
And it's also, he may not subscribe to, like, the Aryan race side of things. He may be a little bit more progressive than most people of his time. But I think because of his religious background, that may not have been...
Not even just the religious background, but in the first book, for instance, he describes, I forget the name, it was like a brief offhanded criminal. He described him as like squint-eyed and stuff. And the way he describes like certain tribes of men, for instance, leads you to believe like, this feels kind of racist. And I think some of that's in Peter Jackson's directing, some of that's in Tolkien's writing. We aren't here to...
I think it's probably a little both.
Probably a little both.
Yeah.
I can't speak to it because he was pretty private about a lot of his political beliefs. But yes, this is getting off topic. Let's get back to C.S. Lewis and Tolkien. We've talked about the way they write their characters and build their worlds. What else should we talk about?
We talked a little about storytelling, too.
Yes.
I kind of want to talk about the overlap characters
Oh my
now.
god, yes.
Yes,
You want to start this off?
I do. So, you guys, there's something that we have discovered. Well, I discovered through Reed, and then I did a little bit digging on C.S. Lewis's end and realized that he has done this too. Because of their friendship, C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien actually used each other in their work, meaning there are characters in both of their novels that are inspired by the other person. So, in the Narnia series, this is actually something I discovered today because I was trying to figure out which character C.S. Lewis had based off of Tolkien. And I don't know why I didn't see it before, but the professor that the Pevensey children are living with, Diggory Kirk, that is who Tolkien is based off of. And funnily enough, I always used to think this as a kid, and as I've grown older, I have looked into it, and Diggory Kirk, the professor, was actually the nephew of the magician and the magician's nephew. So he was there when Ice Queen was awakened, Jadis, and he was there for the creation of the bylaws of Narnia. He explored the land when it was first being inhabited. He discovered all its creatures, and that's why the wardrobe exists in his house. And if you guys don't know this, I think it is mentioned in either The Dawn Treader or The Final Battle, where when Susan and Peter aren't in Narnia, they are both off doing their own various adult things. Susan is in America, and Peter is actually studying with the professor at his house. He's living back in the mansion where the wardrobe is housed, which is ironic because he's so close yet so far to the world. And I think that speaks a little bit towards Tolkien's teaching skills, too, is that he's mentoring and, helping guide Peter along in his knowledge. But I think it's just
that way, but that's good.
I think it's very funny that the professor, or Diggory Kirk, I'm gonna call him by his name, is based off of Tolkien, because we were talking about this before we started recording, and I looked back at the timeline of Diggory Kirk's life, and it looks like he would have been around the age he was in The Magician's Nephew during World War I, which is a parallel to Tolkien, who had fought in World War I and suffers PTSD from it, and then obviously was alive to see World War II, which is when the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe is set. So of course he's kind of reclused away from everybody. He takes in the children and looks after them, but he prefers to be left alone.
I think that's a very thorough analysis.
Thank you.
Tends to happen from fangirls like you.
Well,
this happens. Fangirl files.
Oh yes, I honestly need to make a file drawer and have all of my analyses in this drawer, and then Madison and I can just pull from it and be like, "What are we talking about today?" But do you want to talk about Tolkien's inspiration?
Yes,
because this is my favorite thing to ever exist. This is my
favorite. Yes. So, there was a common joke around Oxford that C.S. Lewis was a slow lecturer, and Tolkien had an idea of creating a very polysynthetic language, which basically means that you just stick a ton of parts together and the words get really long. That's all you need to know. So sometimes he was almost wondering, like, what happens if you create, like, a language that marks for this, that marks for gender, for case, all sorts of stuff, that just marks for everything, and takes a really long time to say. And who would have time to say that? Like a tree. So who would be the slow-talking tree that goes on long-winded rants and talks really slowly and is always on the verge of falling asleep?
And it's philosophical.
And is philosophical, yes. C.S. Lewis Treebeard.
And I can just imagine the, like, conversation that ensued when Tolkien was writing this, and he just went up to C.S. Lewis and goes, hey, so you're a character in my book. And he's like, oh, that's sick, bro. What? Like, which character am I? And he goes, you're a tree. And then I could just see C.S. Lewis being like, fuck you. Like, I just imagine so much sass in this friendship, and I'm here for it. I know this podcast was supposed to be a C.S. Lewis versus J.R.R. Tolkien, but I truly just, this is us fangirling and fanboying about them for an hour.
110%.
And I think we're both okay with that, so.
Actually, I think C.S. Lewis, I fact-checked myself here a little bit. I think C.S. Lewis was known for his big presence and booming voice, which ties into Treebeard.
It embodies him, especially in the movie. If you hear Treebeard speak, it like quakes the earth.
Especially because it brings in, Lord of the Rings would be so much shorter if Tolkien didn't talk about trees so much, which I love, but I don't think you would love. But I love that C.S. Lewis is Treebeard.
No, I know. I think when you told me that while we were watching the movie together, and this was my first time ever watching the movies. I was never big into them when I was a kid. Again, please don't hate me if that's why you're listening to this podcast. But I was never big into them, and then we were watching the movie, and Treebeard comes on, and he goes, hey, you know that's C.S. Lewis? And I just couldn't stop laughing, because I was like, I see it. Because I've heard this man speak before. I'm like, I see it. He's so flamboyant in his speech. It's beautiful. I love him.
I love that. That's just so iconic. Just imagine if you just wrote Madison into like a book.
Oh my God.
Writing.
I will. At the beginning of the first Avenger, I was trying to remember which movie it was from, and it was when Bucky was about to go off to war, and he goes, don't be stupid, or like, don't do anything stupid, and he goes, how can I? You're taking all the stupid with you, like Steve says to him. So every time Madison and I exit a room from each other, and I'm like, don't do anything stupid, and she goes, well, you have all the stupid here with you. So I just feel like writing her into one of my novels would be the only way the novel would be likable.
Here's the question, though: would you write her in as the
pure
the kid
evil
who becomes
pure evil?
Okay, you're gonna be as petty as making her a tree.
No.
Can you be that petty?
No, but she'd just be pure evil. Madison is my evil cohort in life.
Just describing a little demon in a cage.
If anyone has ever heard Madison's shriek, that's what it sounds like, a little demon in a cage. There's one more thing I kind of want to touch on with you.
Yes.
So, out of Tolkien's books, out of the series that you love, do you have a favorite book?
Of The Lord of the Rings?
Yes, and why?
I quite like Return of the King.
Explain.
Well, I don't know.
Is there anything he does specifically?
Actually, I like the Two Towers quite a lot. I like all of them. I'm sorry. I think it's just in the sense that he ties everything together, and I think just I remember reading it and really getting excited as Sam was taking Frodo with him, and he took out the light and everything, and I just remember reading that and like getting all excited, and it was like 1 a.m. and stuff like that. I think that's why it's my favorite. The ending of Lord of the Rings in the book is pretty damn different than the movie, and I hate to be one of those people who's like, it's different in the movie. I actually think I like it better in the movie, like for the application of the movie, because for Tolkien, for the book purpose, then they came back And Saruman, who's the white wizard that ended up turning evil, he's back by the name of Sharky, because he didn't get killed in the book, and he's taken over the Shire and industrialized it. And from Tolkien's perspective, that's huge, because he was a big environmentalist, and it was like the corruption of this like little society, his little perfect Hobbiton Shire area, you know? And in the movie, I don't think that would resonate as well. Like, oh, look, this guy never died. He took over. Now a big sad ending. Bye. So instead, Peter Jackson does this beautiful ending of just, they come back and everything's the same, but because of the trauma that they've been through, they don't quite fit in. And I think that's a beautiful cinematic ending. And I just really like the Return of the King in both Lord of the Rings and in the movies, and sort of the way they interact with each other and tell different stories. What about you? Favorite Narnia?
Okay, this is my favorite book, not the movie, because the movie was terrible.
Okay.
My favorite book was The Voyage of the Dawn Treader. It has been ever since I was little when I read it for the first time. I really enjoyed the concept of Edmund and Lucy kind of being on their own together, because they were the only two that still believed in Narnia. And of course, at the end of Prince Caspian, Aslan had said to Peter and Susan, your time here is done, but Edmund and Lucy's is not. So the idea that they get to take their cousin with them, show him how to be good. I loved how the whole book, it was them sailing through almost like the Odyssey. Because they go to Duffer's Island, where there is a whole race of people that has been asleep for so long, and they say the only way for them to wake is to leave their crew and sail on to, I believe, where the world ends, which is almost essentially reminiscent of the Odyssey, because they sail into a realm of merpeople. They said, like, it's almost identical, and I obviously didn't know that at the time, and I'm sorry that it's not a very accurate summary. I'm not as freshly versed on this as Reed is. No, I liked the way that's, I think, the novel that allowed for the most character growth from Edmund, Lucy, Eustace, and Caspian, too, because Caspian does fall in love with Ramandu's daughter, which is, Ramandu is on the Duffer's Island, I believe it's called, and his daughter is the one that Caspian falls in love with. She is the princess of the island, and I think because of that, Caspian has this remarkable growth, and he's actually competing with Edmund for her love, so they both have this growth of, like, okay, I guess I will protect from here, and, like, it'll be fine, and then Caspian can have her, and then Edmund steps into his role as a king when he's always been second to Peter. And so I think that's why that's my favorite book, but the movie was done terribly. I expected it to be done so well, because I actually loved the actors for the Narnia series. I loved Skander Kane's. Honestly, that's who played Edmund. I loved him. I thought he was a magnificent actor when I was a kid. Probably excited. I thought that was going to be so great, especially because the graphics looked so cool, and I was like, you know what? It's Narnia, and it's going to be great. It was so bad. Like, the whole island concept, it was very cheesily done. It reminded me of a Scooby-Doo movie. You know how, like, there's that whole scene in the live-action Scooby-Doo where they're in the haunted house and everything, like, there's a feast on the table. Yeah. And that's what it reminded me of when the people on the island were asleep, and I was like, what the hell is that? I remember, I was like, I don't know how old I was a kid, and I was like, what the fuck am I looking at? So in terms of the Narnia movies, they definitely did not do as good of a job as Lord of the Rings did. Yeah. The Narnia movies, I would say that Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe was the best one, because not only were the battle scenes perfect, not only was it the most factually accurate, but also the score. Immaculate.
Score. Yeah.
But my favorite book was probably The Dawn Treader. And then I remember a lot more about the Silver Chair, because that's when Edmund and Lucy aren't a part of Narnia anymore, and Eustace, the cousin, goes back by himself. And he's still playing the role of this badass kid at school, like, not wanting to have anything to do with anyone, like, not badass, he was kind of a brat, but, like, he basically is like biding his time at this point, wanting to go back to Narnia where he can actually be himself and not like pretend to be an asshole. And so it then becomes his job to save Narnia because Caspian is now old and gray. And I just liked seeing, that was when I saw the most growth with the characters, whereas with books 1 through 4 there was not a lot of growth, and I think it took Peter and Susan's exit to have the growth of the characters who we originally cared about, which were those that discovered Narnia. And
you're a very character-driven reader, aren't you?
I am a very character-driven reader. It's not always plot. I mean, no, I love plot, and I think I personally, as a writer, am better at coming up with plot. But if the character is not likable, I'm not gonna give a fuck.
Yeah, I getcha. And even from your Harry Potter fanaticism, for instance, I like a lot of the side characters, especially, are really interesting.
Oh my god!
Even though
I'm gonna do a whole solo episode about Harry Potter characters that I find interesting that are not necessarily main characters, and by main characters I mean Harry, Ron, and Hermione.
Although Ron and Hermione are quite chef's kiss.
Okay, but they are part of the Golden Trio, and I don't want to talk about them.
There's enough.
There's enough about that, and I would love to do an episode about
Draco,
Neville, Fred and George Weasley, Charlie Weasley, Bill Weasley,
just
Bellatrix Lestrange, Sirius Black. I will go off about everybody.
Gotta bring Harry Potter in some point.
We always do, my friends.
It's in the contract that totally exists.
Maybe next time I'll do Twilight. Well, you guys will hear me go off. Good thing Madison's coming back. Also, fun fact, Madison and I'm going to give you a preview of next week's episode. Madison and I, for you Marvel fans, will be discussing WandaVision, which is set to come out on Friday with episode 1 on Disney+. We are going to have a good time reviewing that, talking about series predictions, maybe Doctor Strange's Multiverse of Madness, because it's supposed to tie into that somehow. But I guess we'll see where the discussion takes us, but that's what's happening next week. Thank you to Reed for joining me today.
And thank you to Sabrina for hosting this podcast.
You're welcome. Please listen to it, because even though you're in it, you're one of our few listeners. So
I'll get you that extra listen.
Thanks. But that being said, thank you guys for listening. And as per always, please follow me and Madison on Instagram at Sabrina Canown and at Wolf Silhouettes. I will put both of our usernames in the description box. Follow our podcast Instagram at Fangirl Files Podcast. And please follow our Fangirl Files Twitter at Fangirl Files Pod on Twitter. We will also post updates on there for you. We also have a YouTube channel, and please, 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 you guys, subscribe. Leave us a review if you can on Apple Podcasts, on Anchor, on anywhere that leaves podcast reviews. Please subscribe and review us, because we really want to have more fun fangirl discussions with you all. With that being said, I'm sorry this episode was such a word vomit, but we had some fun, and I will catch y'all next Wednesday. Have a good weekend, and get the fuck out of here.
That was rude.
That's our outro. We've agreed upon it.
I know, you're gonna cut this.
Configuring the Bluetooth, deciding who controls the music, avoiding potholes, remembering where you parked. Why are simple things sometimes so complicated? Thankfully, with Auto Owners Insurance, getting the right coverage for your vehicle doesn't have to be one of them. Auto Owners works with independent agents who live in your community and answer when you call, so you can get back to more important things, like remembering if you're on the 3rd or 4th level of the parking garage. That's simple human sense. Ask your independent agent if Auto Owners makes sense for you.
Hey guys, I'm Serafina, and thanks for listening to SGP Radio. Stream our podcast and more across SGP radio platforms, including the Brandon Gerald Productions app for iOS and Android. Or you can visit www.bgpllcapp.com. Stream, download, listen, like, share, subscribe, repost, binge, and enjoy this podcast and so much others like Not Your Token Black Girl, Working Gal's Guide, Black Girl Storytime, Juice Pro Wrestling, Black Guy Wrestling, and Podcasts About Nothing. We have so much more on our stations tailored for her, noir, and wrestling fans, including SGP Radio Originals and our blogs. Enjoy.
Support for this episode has been provided by Ratio Keto-Friendly Crunchy Bars. If counting macros makes your head spin, count instead on a snack by Ratio. They've done the math for you, so you can spend less time studying the label and more time enjoying your day. Delicious and convenient, both their toasted almond and lemon almond flavors have 2 grams of net carbs and a unique combination of sugar and protein, all in a satisfying crunch. Interested? Ratio Keto-Friendly Bars are now available in the granola bar aisle at Walmart.
As a small business owner, you're redefining business as usual. From rethinking the way you work to reassessing your bandwidth, you're changing the way you do business. And at Cox Business, so are we. With flexible internet packages to get you back to business. Rethink, reconnect, reimagine. Get 50 megs of internet for only $70 per month for 6 months. No annual contract required. Ends 12/31/20. Restrictions apply. Visit coxbusiness.com for details. All services subject to Cox Business general terms.